If I'd left that dog on the side of the road, maybe I'd still have a family. Or at least a chest without claw marks. That was the first thing Riley Thompson said to the sheriff after it all went down. But before blood was spilled, before fences were torn, and before the howl that silenced the cattle ranch for good, there was a quiet afternoon on a sunburned Texas highway and a half-dead bulldog pup lying beside a busted fence post. Hey, before we dive deeper into this haunting story of loyalty instinct and the darkness that sometimes hides behind a wagging tail, don't forget to subscribe to Animal Story. If you love gripping animal tales with a twist, this channel is for you. We post new, true-to-life inspired stories every week. Now, let's go back to where it all started. Riley wasn't the kind of guy who stopped for much. Out on the prairie roads, miles from town, he'd seen more roadkill than road signs. But something about that bulldog pup, muddy bruised and still breathing, made him tap the brakes on his old Chevy. "Poor fella," he muttered, stepping out with his boots crunching dry gravel. The dog barely lifted its head. Riley knelt beside him. The little guy's left eye was swollen shut, and the chain around his neck was so tight it had started cutting into the skin. "Hell happened to you." He unhooked the chain and gently scooped the pup into the back of his truck. It didn't growl. It didn't whimper. It just let him. That's what hit Riley the hardest. Back at his ranch, tucked between mesquite trees and red dirt hills, he cleaned the dog's wounds and poured lukewarm water into an old cereal bowl. The pup didn't move for hours, just stared at the wall like it was waiting for something worse. "I guess you're my shadow now," Riley said, lighting a cigarette and sitting on the porch as the sun melted into the ground. He named him Brutus, partly as a joke. "You look tough, but you got the eyes of someone who's been through hell." Brutus stayed close. Too close, even. Riley would wake up in the middle of the night with the dog sitting at the foot of the bed staring. Not barking. Not asleep. Just watching. But Riley didn't care. After losing his wife to cancer and his daughter to a life in New York that didn't have room for dusty boots, the dog gave him a reason to wake up, to feed something, to talk to someone. Over the months, Brutus grew fast, real fast. His chest broadened, legs thickened, and his bark got deep enough to rattle the windows. He wasn't your average bulldog. Folks in town noticed, too. "That's one scary mutt you got there, Riley," the hardware store clerk said once, half laughing, half nervous. Big heart under all that muscle, Riley shrugged. But some things didn't sit right. Like how Brutus would sit for hours near the fence line watching the woods. Like how he tore apart a raccoon with no hesitation, his mouth dripping red, and didn't let Riley get near the body. Or how one night Riley caught him digging not in the yard, but in a perfect circle behind the barn. Over and over. Not looking for anything, just digging. Riley chalked it up to trauma. The poor thing had probably come from a dogfighting ring or worse. Maybe the scars on his body were matched by scars inside. But what Riley didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Brutus wasn't just healing. He was remembering. And soon, he'd stop pretending to be a pet. For nearly a year, Brutus was the best damn dog Riley ever had. He followed commands, herded cattle like he'd done it his whole life, and once even cornered a coyote that had snuck into the chicken coop. The ranch hands called him the Muscle, and neighbors started asking if he could breed. But Riley always said no. He had a gut feeling, couldn't quite explain it, that Brutus wasn't the kind of dog you passed on. Something about him felt off. Not dangerous. Just different. That changed the night Riley took him to the vet in Abilene. Brutus had started limping, dragging one leg slightly. Riley figured maybe he'd stepped on barbed wire, but when the vet pulled out the scanner and ran it over Brutus's neck, the thing beeped. "Looks like he's chipped," she said. Riley raised a brow. "I never got him chipped." The vet looked at the screen, then frowned. "That's not a standard ID chip. Military code. Looks encrypted." "Military?" Riley laughed. Lady, that dog eats squirrels and sleeps under my truck. She didn't laugh. This kind of chip doesn't go in house pets. That night, Brutus wouldn't get back into the truck. He stood outside the vet clinic, eyes locked on Riley Low growl, rumbling in his throat for the first time ever. Just once. Deep and short. Like a warning. Riley froze. Get in, boy. Brutus didn't move for a long second. Then, like a switch flipped, he hopped into the truck bed and curled up as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. Back on the ranch, little things started piling up. Brutus began avoiding Riley's touch, especially near his collar or head. He stopped responding to sit, stay, or come. He'd still sleep on the porch, but would stare out into the night, head cocked, like he was listening to voices only he could hear. One morning, Riley found a dead deer torn apart on his property. No signs of bite marks, just ripped open, gutted, precise. He blamed coyotes at first. But the next night, Riley caught Brutus standing over a second deer carcass, blood on his jowls, eyes glowing faint in the moonlight. But here's the thing, Brutus wasn't eating. He was just standing there, staring. Riley stepped forward. Brutus? What in God's name? The dog snapped his head toward him so fast it looked unnatural. His eyes locked on Riley's like a stranger had just walked into the room. Then in a second, Brutus trotted off head low like he'd been caught sneaking cookies off the counter. Riley tried to shrug it off. He's just a dog with trauma, he told himself. Maybe I'm the one losing it. But deep down, his instincts, those ranch-born, desert-hardened instincts, were telling him the truth. Brutus wasn't healing. He was evolving. One night, Riley dug through old boxes in the attic and found his daughter's old tablet. He powered it on, connected to the dusty Wi-Fi router, and started searching. Military dog program. Canine chip codes. X9. What he found chilled him to the bone. Articles, whispered stories, forum posts, a cancelled Pentagon project. Genetically modified dogs bred for combat tracking and termination. The program was allegedly shut down due to behavioral instability. Dogs that became too intelligent, too strong, too unpredictable. Project Hex, X9, was one of the prototypes. Brutus wasn't a stray. He was a weapon that had escaped. The next morning, Riley stood at the back door watching Brutus drink from the water trough. He looked normal, calm, even goofy with his tongue hanging out. But Riley knew better now. He leaned against the doorway, sipped black coffee, and whispered, "You ain't my dog, are you?" Brutus lifted his head slowly. And, for the second time ever, he growled. Not loud, not aggressive, just enough to let Riley know he'd heard. Riley wasn't a man easily shaken. He'd wrangled bulls, lost a wife, watched his own kid drive away without looking back. Life had thrown plenty his way. But what he saw the next night behind the barn, that damn near broke him. It started just after midnight. Riley couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house felt like a warning. Every gust of wind through the mesquites sounded like a whisper. He grabbed his flashlight, threw on his boots, and stepped outside. Brutus wasn't on the porch. That alone was enough to make Riley stop cold. Brutus never missed porch duty. "Brutus!" he called out into the darkness. No bark, no shuffle, no answer. Riley crept around the side of the house, boots crunching over dry gravel. The air was thick and hot, like a storm was coming, but the sky stayed black and still. Then he saw it. Behind the barn, where the moonlight barely touched the ground, Brutus was digging again. Not wild, chaotic digging. Methodical. Slow. Deliberate. A perfect circle, maybe 6 feet wide. Dirt piled evenly along the edges. Claw marks everywhere. Riley raised the light. "Brutus," he barked. The dog stopped, turned. His face was covered in dirt, his chest heaving. But those eyes, they weren't the same. Gone was the look of a dog who needed saving. This wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was focus. Riley stepped closer, gripping the flashlight tighter. "What are you doing, boy?" Brutus took one step forward, standing inside the circle. Then another. Then he sat, right in the center, like he was waiting for something. The next morning, Riley called up an old buddy named Hank, retired Army, did 2 tours, and now ran a pawn shop in Amarillo. "Need you to look at something," Riley said. He drove the chipped from Brutus's neck in his glove compartment, wrapped in foil like it was toxic. Hank took one look and went pale. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. "Out of a dog I picked up last year." Hank looked around, lowered his voice. "I seen something like this overseas. Black projects, not meant for tracking. This kind of chip. It sends and receives. Sends what? Commands, triggers, behavior shifts. You name it. These dogs, they weren't meant to be pets. They were meant to be weapons that listened to signals." Riley's jaw tightened. "So what happens if the signal comes back on?" Hank stared. "Then whatever's been sleeping inside him wakes up." Back at the ranch, Brutus wasn't waiting at the gate like usual. Riley stepped out of the truck, gun holstered just in case. He checked the barn, the pasture. Nothing. Then he walked behind the barn and stopped dead. The circle had changed. Now there were symbols etched into the dirt, like claw-carved runes. Not random. They formed a pattern Riley didn't understand, but knew he wasn't supposed to see. And in the center, a deer skull. Fresh. No skin, no blood. Just clean, white bone. Like something had boiled it down overnight. Suddenly, a low growl. Riley spun around. Brutus stood 10 feet away, not moving, just staring, hackles up, shoulders tense. For the first time since he'd brought him home, Riley was afraid of his own dog. "Easy now," he said. Voice calm, hand slowly reaching toward his hip. Brutus growled louder, deeper. Then he did something Riley couldn't explain. He took 2 steps back into the shadows and smiled. Dogs don't smile. Not like that. Not like a person. Riley didn't sleep that night. He sat in the kitchen, shotgun across his lap, eyes fixed on the back door. The night dragged on in silence, but the sense of being watched never faded. Just before dawn, the wind picked up, and from behind the barn came a sound he would never forget. Digging. To be continued. The truth about Brutus is closer than ever, and trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. Want to know what happens next? Make sure you're subscribed to Animal's Story. New episodes drop weekly, and what's coming in Part 4 will leave you speechless. Riley hadn't slept in 2 nights. Not a wink. He sat at the kitchen table, boots still on, coffee gone cold in his mug. The shotgun across his lap was loaded, safety off. Outside, the Texas wind howled like it knew something he didn't. And somewhere beyond the barn, Brutus was still out there, digging. It had been 4 days since the dog last came inside. 4 days since Riley found that skull in the dirt circle. He'd tried erasing it, stomping the symbols out with his boots, filling the hole with fresh soil. But by the next morning, it was back cleaner, deeper, precise. Riley even installed a trail cam, one of the motion sensor kinds he used for spotting coyotes. The camera snapped 3 photos that night. All 3 were completely black, except for the last one. That one showed Brutus sitting dead center in the circle, staring straight into the lens like he knew it was watching. Riley finally called someone. Not the sheriff, not animal control. He called someone off-grid, a guy named Lester, whom he hadn't talked to in 10 years. Lester used to work private security overseas. He was the paranoid kind, lived in a trailer with Faraday cages and scanners always muttering about government signals. If anyone would believe a dog was a walking weapon, it'd be Lester. The man showed up late that afternoon in a rusted-out Suburban with gun cases in the back seat and a hand-rolled cigarette behind his ear. Riley briefed him quick about the chip, the military connection, the symbols behind the barn. Lester didn't laugh, didn't even blink. He just asked one question. "Has it turned on you yet?" Riley hesitated. "Not fully, but I think it's coming." Lester nodded. "Then we got one shot. Tonight." They set up a perimeter just before sunset. Tripwire lines with bells. Infrared cameras linked to a tablet Lester wouldn't stop tapping. Riley didn't like the way the sun dipped below the hill so fast, as if darkness was in a hurry. By 10 p.m., they were back in the house, weapons within reach. Lester placed the chip on the table between them, wrapped in tin foil. "I'm guessing this is the key," he said. "They used to have handlers trigger aggression remotely. Might have been accidentally reactivated by some stray signal. Radio tower, satellite, hell, even an old emergency broadcast." Riley exhaled. "So we shut it down." Lester leaned forward. "We fry it. But first we lure him back." That was the part Riley hated. He walked outside alone into the cold, flashlight in hand. "Brutus," he called, voice trembling more than he liked. "Come on home, boy." No sound. Then footsteps behind the chicken coop. Slow. Deliberate. Brutus stepped out of the shadows like he hadn't missed a beat. But this wasn't the same dog Riley raised. His eyes were different now, glassy, cold, calculated, and he was foaming slightly at the mouth. "Easy, boy," Riley whispered. Brutus didn't bark. He just stared. And then he charged. Riley dove back, rolled onto the porch, just as the dog lunged, and Lester pulled the trigger from inside the doorway. A non-lethal net gun blasted out, wrapping Brutus mid-air. He hit the porch hard, snarling, biting through the cords, but it bought them just enough time. Lester sprinted out, jamming a handheld EMP device onto Brutus's neck, where the chip was buried. A high-pitched whine, a flash of blue, then silence. Brutus collapsed, breathing heavy, eyes wide. Not angry, not confused, just empty. He didn't move for nearly 10 minutes. Then slowly Brutus lifted his head and looked at Riley and cried. A low, mournful whimper like something broken had just been freed inside him. Riley dropped to his knees. "Jesus, what did they do to you?" They kept Brutus sedated that night. Lester dug out the chip and destroyed it with a hammer in the fire pit out back. It sparked like metal full of static. Sparks, green and blue. Unnatural. By dawn, Brutus was asleep on the floor of the barn. Peaceful. Like the dog he used to be. But deep down, Riley knew. This wasn't over. The chip might be gone. But whatever they put inside him, that was something no fire could burn away. For the first time in weeks, the ranch was quiet. No growling. No footsteps behind the barn. No circles in the dirt. Brutus slept most of the next day, curled up in the shade of the mesquite trees, like he'd never been anything but a tired old farm dog. Riley watched him from the porch, a cold beer sweating in his hand, not sure whether to feel relief or dread. "You think it's really over?" he asked Lester. The ex-soldier didn't answer right away. He just stared out past the fence line, jaw tight. "Depends," he finally said. "What do you think that circle was for?" That night, Riley walked out back with a shovel and a flashlight. He had to see it again. The circle was still there, like it had been branded into the earth. The claw marks were shallower now, but the bones were back. Different this time. Smaller. A fox skull freshly picked clean. No blood, no drag marks. Like something had plucked the animal from the woods and laid it down neatly in the center. Riley's stomach turned. Whatever had taken hold of Brutus, was it really gone? Or had it just moved on? The next morning, Lester packed up his gear and got ready to leave. "You sure you don't want backup?" Riley asked. Lester shook his head. "If it comes back, it won't come through me. It came through the dog. I disabled the chip. What's left, if anything, isn't my war." Riley nodded. But deep down, he knew. This was his fight now. For 2 weeks, things went back to normal. Brutus ate like normal. Slept in the shade. Rode in the truck bed with his tongue flapping in the wind. Riley started to let his guard down. He even laughed again. But then came the day he rode out to the north pasture and found the ground torn up 4 perfect circles, etched just beneath the soil, arranged like the points of a compass. And at the center, Brutus's old collar. Still locked, still blood-stained. That night, Riley stood over the fire pit and threw the collar in without hesitation. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't want to know. He just wanted it gone. But even as the leather burned, he noticed something across the field. A shadow. Four-legged. Low to the ground. Watching, he didn't tell Brutus. Didn't show fear. Didn't touch a weapon. But he started locking the doors again. A week later, the first neighbor went missing. Dan Vickers, retired horse trainer, lived half a mile down the gravel road. Found his truck idling in the driveway door, wide open, coffee still hot in the cup holder. No blood. No sign of struggle. Just gone. Then came the tracks. Big ones. Too big for a coyote and too deep for a normal dog. They circled Riley's chicken coop one night just like Brutus used to do. Brutus growled at them. Low. Nervous. Not territorial. Afraid. One night, Riley found him shaking in the corner of the barn. Tail, tucked teeth, chattering. Like he knew something was coming. Something bigger. Riley sat beside him, scratched behind his ears, whispered, "You're not the monster anymore, are ya?" Brutus whimpered. The next evening, Riley dug up the dirt behind the barn one last time. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe bones. Maybe answers. What he found was worse. A second chip, smaller, sleeker, still glowing faint red like an ember buried deep. It hadn't been in Brutus. It had been in the earth, like a beacon, calling something home. There's something deeply wrong with the land behind Riley's barn. He knows it now, not just in his gut, but in his bones. You can feel it in the air. Like a pressure change before a storm, but heavier. Like the ground itself is holding its breath. And Brutus won't go near it anymore. Riley didn't tell anyone about the second chip. What would he say? Hey, I found a glowing piece of military tech buried 6 inches under my barnyard, and now my dog sleeps with one eye open. Yeah, no one would believe that. But he believed it. And Brutus believed it too. The day after he found it, Riley took the chip to town, straight to the electronics guy at Murdoch's Feed and Hardware, a retired Navy engineer named Saul, who could fix anything from a radio to a satellite phone. Saul didn't ask questions, just scanned the chip, then went pale. "You said this was military," he asked. "Found it on my property," Riley replied. Saul squinted. "This thing's still transmitting." "To what?" Saul didn't answer right away. Then he leaned in real quiet and said, "It's not sending a signal." Riley frowned. "Then what's it doing?" Saul tapped the monitor. "It's receiving one." That night, Brutus stood in the doorway of the barn for 2 hours. Didn't move, didn't blink, just stared out toward the woods. At exactly 2:16 a.m., he growled and backed away. Riley looked out through the kitchen window and saw nothing. But the wind had stopped. Not slowed, stopped. By morning, the dirt circle was back. Same spot, same perfect edges. But now it was twice as big. No bones this time, just a hole about 3 feet wide. And deep, real deep, like something was coming up, not going down. Riley didn't tell Brutus to stay in the house. He didn't need to. The dog wouldn't go near it. Just whined at the window, pacing tail down. Whatever they'd taken out of Brutus, maybe it didn't kill the connection. Maybe it passed it on. That evening, Riley sat with a beer and a rifle staring out at the field. He remembered something Lester had said before he left. Just because the tech's broken doesn't mean the door's closed. And now that chip, still warm in Riley's pocket, was blinking again. One red flash every 7 seconds. Like a countdown. He tried calling Lester. No answer. Tried Saul. Voicemail. Even the Wi-Fi at the ranch kept cutting out something about interference. Maybe a storm front. But the sky was clear as glass. It was too quiet. Too still. And the cattle had all gathered at the far side of the pasture, pressed up against the fence, like they were trying to get away from something. At 9:44 p.m., Brutus started barking. Not wild barking, warning barking. The kind Riley hadn't heard since the first week he brought the dog home. Riley grabbed the rifle and stepped outside. The wind kicked up. Fast. Dust swirled through the barnyard like it had been yanked from underground. And from inside that hole behind the barn came a sound. Not an animal. Not human. Something in between. Wet. Clicking. And close. Riley raised the rifle. Brutus stood beside him, teeth bared, every muscle tight. And then a hand came out, or something shaped like a hand. Too long, too many joints, and not enough skin. It didn't reach for them. It reached for the chip in Riley's pocket. Riley backed up. The chip in his jeans flashed 3 times. Then everything went black. When Riley came to, it was morning. Brutus was gone. So was the hole. The dirt was smooth again. No signs of a struggle, no paw prints. Just the collar, Brutus's, laid gently at the edge of the porch. Still warm, Riley stared at the field's heart-pounding jaw clenched. He whispered one word. "Why?"